I lost my fiancé, Josh, to a fentanyl overdose. He died on August 29th, 2018. He was buried on August 31st, 2018, which I now know is International Overdose Awareness Day. So that's one of many reasons I feel compelled to talk about it, his story. So Josh and I met in graduate school. He was in a clinical psychology PhD program, and Josh was the smartest person I've ever met. Literally the smartest person I've ever met in my life. And he was a very good, he was a great researcher. So that was he didn't so much like the clinical aspect, he liked the research. And he was great with everything, but he liked public health, and he also liked studying substance use and addiction. I didn't know he was addicted to drugs until he died. So he knew how to hide it. I'll never know like the full history of it, but I suspect what happened was, so he had been in a car accident the year before we met and was had chronic pain, but his knowledge and experience, he knew, and he was terrified of becoming addicted to opiates. Eventually, he knew he had to do some kind of opiates, just in small doses. And at one point, he was on the fentanyl patch, and that actually worked better than anything else for him. And he didn't abuse it. He couldn't abuse it. His parents had found out that he ended up being prescribed Oxy in April of 2017. And that kind of tracks with when things started to be a little bit different with him. Nobody knew that he was on drugs, but when he died, he had a lot of fentanyl. So he had 3 types of fentanyl in his blood and 2 types in his urine. So acetylfentanyl was the one that his system wasn't used, and that killed him. He was shooting it up. I mean, he was IV using, and was still hiding it, still functional. He was home at his parents' house, and they found him dead. And he still had so he was shooting up into his wrists, because that's where he would always get blood taken. And he still had the needle in his wrist. He didn't have any marks that anybody saw. He was hiding it very well. When he was in grad school, he taught an undergraduate psychology course about psychology, drugs, and addiction. He was very educated and knowledgeable about all of this. And I share his story for many reasons, but one is that the stigma of addiction is really what killed him, because he never would have told anybody, because what would have happened to his career? What would people think of him? How could something like this happen to him? But addiction happens. Addiction does not discriminate. You can't be too smart to become an addict. You can't be too wealthy to become an addict. You can't be from too good of a family. It's literally, it can literally happen to anybody. I wish that he could have given himself like the grace that he gave everyone else. Like, you know, he was never hard on other people. He was always hard on himself. And, you know, he deserved recovery just as much as anybody. His story is not one where he didn't take a pill that he didn't know. I don't believe that he thought he was genuinely shooting straight heroin, because because of the nature of his research. I mean, we talked about things. We watched Intervention all the time. And he knew that there really was no straight, pure heroin anymore. It's always going to be at least laced with fentanyl. There was no morphine in his system, so there really wasn't even any heroin in what he had been doing. So he didn't, and he didn't even test positive for marijuana. It was just fentanyl. I mean, this can happen to anybody. It could happen to you. It could happen to your children. It could happen to your parents. It could happen to your neighbor. It could happen to your entire family. God, and the stigma surrounding addiction is what we need to focus on and doing away with, because he shouldn't have been afraid to tell me, to tell anybody that, you know, he was struggling. I mean, what I hate the most is that he went through that alone. And ultimately, the stigma is what killed him, because he was afraid of his reputation, of how people would see him, of, you know, people being disappointed in him. And it wasn't his fault. It's a medical illness.